And with that, I want to welcome our special guest today, Dr. Linda Alpert-Gillis, who is going to be sharing about crisis intervention and de-escalation strategies. And Linda, as you guys know, is a member of our expert ECHO team and is also a full professor of psychiatry, pediatrics, and clinical nursing here at URMC, and also director of our pediatric behavioral health and wellness outpatient service, as well as the Lab for Innovation in Child Mental Health Care Delivery. She has been instrumental in establishing child mental health services in pediatric practices, in school sites and settings, and other community-based settings, and has a passion for families and parents as well. She also has a strong expertise in evidence-based brief crisis interventions and de-escalation techniques. And so we welcome you, Linda, to share our brief training today around crisis intervention and de-escalation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to share yours. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be with you again today. I've really been enjoying the ECHO sessions, and I feel like one of the great things is that we all get to learn from each other. So I've enjoyed learning from you as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about crisis management and de-escalation. And I just want to say the content was developed by both Melissa and myself. So just as an example, we can think about as I go over some material is it's always helpful to think about a student. And so the student, one of the students I'd like you to think about, though, you know, if you have one in your own building, that's even better. But, you know, a 15-year-old girl who's struggling, her grandma passed away. She's been having more difficulties with stomach aches, headaches, and exhaustion. You know, she feels like the workload is overwhelming and she keeps asking for changes in her schedule. And then on this specific day, the teacher notices she's spending less time with her friends. She's been snappy with her friends. She seems moodier and more downcast. Her friends are starting to leave her alone. And now she finds herself in English, and the teacher is noticing that she's refusing to participate. The teacher finally approaches her, takes away her drawing pad where she's been doodling, says she has to engage. Kendra stands up, swears at the teacher, says she doesn't want to live anymore, and storms out. So as we think about the cycle of dysregulation and regulation, you know, I want you to think about, like, what are some of the things that led up to the incident of her storming out of the classroom. So just one slide in general about emotional regulation. Basically, this is something we all do all the time. And our skills to manage our understanding and expression of emotions really develops from infancy on, and is still developing even through adolescence. And so when we talk about regulating emotions, we're not talking about suppressing emotions, we're talking about expressing them and managing them and coping with them in appropriate ways. All right, so we're going to look at the cycle of emotional dysregulation and what all these different stages look like and how to intervene at these different stages. One thing that I'll probably be saying repeatedly is that the time to intervene is really at the beginning stages and at the end stages. Once a kid, can you see my mouse? I think you can, right? Okay. Once a kid is kind of in this top phase, you're really just trying to manage it. You're not really trying to teach anything. You're not really, there's not really too much you can do. We get that question a lot of what to do, like when the kid is like throwing things or tipping over the desk or things like that. There's not that much you can do in this phase, but we're going to talk about it. But the main points of intervention are really early on at the two tails of the cycle of regulation. The other important thing that's good to note is that we all have our own cycle of regulation. And when we're dealing with a kid who is dysregulated, we too are going to have challenges managing our own emotions and reactions. And so as you can see, the curve doesn't get as high as it does for the kid who's dysregulated, but clearly we are experiencing distress that sometimes it's hard to manage and that we need to be attending to. The other point is that not all kids' curves look the same. So some kids may have a higher, may go from agitation to peak in one fell swoop, and then show a very rapid recovery, where other kids may remain at that peak longer. So the point of this is that everybody's curve is somewhat unique. Here's another curve. This one you can see the kid is already starting at a higher point. So for Kendra, who we just talked about, she had already been eating lunch alone. She'd been snappy with her friends. Her friends are leaving her alone more. She's coming in somewhat triggered to begin with. And then she's engaging in a typical coping strategy for her, which is doodling, and the teacher calls her out on it. So again, kids are not necessarily coming in at the bottom of the curve. They may be coming in a little bit higher up. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of these phases. And whenever you see the binoculars, that means this is what it looks like. And so we're going to have one slide about what it looks like, and then we're going to have a couple of slides on what you can do. So as I said before, when kids are calm and engaged, that's where teaching happens. That's where emotional regulation skills get taught. And that's where relationships are built, which are so important in helping kids cope. So kids look compliant, cooperative, engaged, and responsive to praise. And we all know what that looks like, and we all love that. So what is the goal for this phase? It's to keep it going. We love it and we want to see it continue. So that's through developing relationships, providing structure and consistency, teaching social and behavioral expectations, and providing positive attention for positive behaviors. So again, this is where most of the teaching around emotional regulation skills are going to occur. Okay. All right, so there's different ways of practicing calm and emotional regulation. So some is by doing relaxing breathing and diaphragmatic breathing. There is a great website from Australia called The Smiling Mind, which focuses on mindfulness strategies that can be used in the classroom, and things like coloring, mindful eating, all sorts of things, of ways of different strategies for practicing calmness, yoga, stretching. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the trigger phase. So the trigger phase, as even with Kendrick, can happen both inside the building and before they get to the building. So common school-based triggers may include like difficult academic tasks, something a kid finds challenging. Let's say a kid has a learning disability in math and they're given a difficult math task. Transitions, going from class to class, transitioning between a quiz and a different kind of assignment. Teasing by peers, a negative interaction with a teacher or counselor. These are all common triggers. And then there are common triggers outside of school that the kid may be coming in with. So a fight with a parent or a family member, if they're overtired or hungry, if they're stressed in their romantic relationships, they've been bullied on social media, the family is struggling with financial difficulties. So this is a very important phase to intervene in. Again, it's important to anticipate potential triggers and make student-specific accommodations. And one of the resources we're going to give you today that will be in the resources is like a way to work out a plan for a specific kid to figure out their triggers. So the best time to recognize early signs of stress are during this phase, and helping kids refocus and move away from the sources of stress, and to redirect them or potentially the entire class activity. So you really want to encourage folks to notice and acknowledge the triggers. So oftentimes ignoring them will cause some escalation. So kindness and personal attention is so important. Modeling calming or soothing exercises, using your proximity, body language, facial expression, distraction are helpful. Not putting the kid on the spot. And we might think of the Kendra example of the teacher taking away the doodling pad, may have been a source of embarrassment for her, and may have then escalated the situation. The next phase is the agitation phase, and that is right up here. So it's we still have a good chance of de-escalating at this phase. And what does it look like? The child is having difficulty engaging. There's agitated body language. So they may be tapping, they may be twirling their pencils, they may have their head down on the desk. So these are all signs of agitation, whether it's withdrawal or whether it's more active. So again, it's a great time to intervene. It may be that you're going to redirect, or the teacher will redirect or shift the task. So asking the student if they need help, providing choices of alternate activities, providing a source of distraction, maybe having them take a break from the anxiety producing event, and very importantly, validating the emotional experience. And validation cannot be overemphasized. So in terms of thinking about validation, you want to reflect it. You know, soccer's just not very much fun for you. You wish we were doing a different unit in PE, you know. So really kind of figuring out what the content is around the emotion that they're experiencing and acknowledging the emotion. You know, you felt really confused about those directions. You know, maybe I was not clear enough. You know, let me try again. And accepting what they're trying to communicate. You know, I can see why you'd feel that way. A lot of people have trouble with my directions about this topic. It can be really upsetting and you don't know what to do when that happens. So validation is essential pretty much to every intervention at this that you're going to think about in this phase. And, you know, it's important to communicate acceptance of feelings, but not necessarily the behavior that a child's engaging in. And it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them that soccer stinks or the math is too hard for them. It just means that you're understanding their perspective. And it's really only after validation that you can suggest behavior change. So other things to think about in terms of interventions for agitation, directing them to a different activity, using clear and specific language. Sometimes people will provide warnings. It's important to know that if you know a student escalates into crisis mode when you present them with potential negative consequences, it's good not to do that. and to focus on what you want them to do versus what the consequences are at this point. Now we're moving up the ladder and kids are becoming more accelerated. And at this point, it is hard to intervene successfully to get them to kind of go back down. So oftentimes at the C, you might see provocative or argumentative statements of which you're going to try to not take the bait. The behavior becomes more overt and other people are noticing the behavior. Kids can get more disruptive. It's the middle of the cycle really, but it's often when other people really start noticing it. But again, if you start noticing it at the acceleration phase, you're less likely to be able to successfully intervene versus when you intervened earlier. So acknowledging and validating feelings is important, offering a strategy to maybe help deal with the problem, identifying strategies that students can use to cool off, like go get a drink of water, let's do some breathing together, not rushing the student. You see a lot of delayed responding in this phase. And it's really important to give the kid that space to respond versus just jumping to the next thing. And then as soon as anything positive happens, you want to reinforce it. And again, if you do ask a question, it's generally not a great time to be demanding of anything, including answering questions. But again, if you're giving them something to respond to, you really want to wait. Again, not a great time to offer choices because they can often feel too overwhelming, not responding with a demand or consequences at this point. And the thing that when we're talking about cycle of regulation, that's the most stressful for teachers and I'd say parents when kids are in this phase is not taking things too personally. So the kind of things kids say is like, I hate you, you can't make me, I refuse, I won't do it. And taking the bait is the worst thing you can do. And so you really don't want to respond to all those ways that the child is showing their stress and not get kind of sucked into that hole. The next phase is the peak phase, and that's really when you see the biggest dysregulation. So you may see aggression, threatens to harm oneself, tipping over desk, uncontrollable crying, all the things that kids can do when they're very dysregulated. It's usually a short phase, so that is really important for folks to remember, but it can be refueled depending on what's going on. So if a teacher is saying, stop that, or you can't do that, or you're suspended, those are all things that are likely to fuel this phase and make it last longer. So what do you do? I think is tricky. Oh, I think my slide's in the wrong place. Oh, what happened? Oh, I think this was Melissa's. So hang on. I'm going to have to exit. I'm doing pretty good on time. So you're going to have to just excuse me for a sec. I'm going to have to go back into my PowerPoint and unhide those slides that Melissa had warned me about when she had looked at my presentation earlier. So I may need some guided help here, Melissa. So let's see, I'm going to go down to the slides.
Right click on them and click unhide slides.
All right, let's see if I can do it.
And Linda, you've got about 4 minutes left, just so you know.
Okay, all right. It says it's not hidden. It's not hid. Oh, but there's a line through them.
That means they're hid.
Very interesting.
If you want, you can just show us.
Okay, oh, it's working, it's working.
Great.
All right, it's working. And I'm doing all right, so hang on with me. I don't have too many slides left. I apologize for not getting this right before. I hate taking up a minute of time to unhide my slides, but that's what I gotta do. All right. All right, so I'm back on. I'm gonna share my slides again. I'm thinking of all my youth mental health first aid partners when we were experiencing technical difficulties. I'm seeing Kathy there. All right. Okay. All right. So peak phase. So the goal is not to kind of have the last word, or to the goal is to reduce the intensity and duration of the crisis. So you want to pay attention to your timing and approach. A good thing to remember is no look, no talk, no touch. You want to give students space. As I said, discussing consequence may escalate behavior. You need to pay attention to the environment and be as non-intrusive and non-invasive as possible. You don't want to stand in front of an exit. And you want to keep other students out of the picture. You want to pay attention to your own behavior, as we talked about before. It's important to know what the school's policies and procedures are in these situations, of course, as always. Identifying a safe space for the student to calm down, limiting stimulus. If you talk at all, it's with a calm voice, validating students' feelings and statements, offer simple ways for students to communicate, and very importantly, predicting positive outcomes. Everything will be fine. We just need a way to figure out how best to help you. So then you're into de-escalation. The student is calming down. They can re-escalate quickly at this point, so you do not want them to be triggered again. Again, the goal is to keep the student de-escalated. So you don't want to redirect too quickly, not a good time to debrief. You want to use encouraging and supportive words, even if the student has acted out in ways that are very inappropriate. And it's important to help get the student back on track. And so providing a separate work area, providing them with an independent activity, something that's relatively easy and can be accomplished quickly, gives the opportunity to reinforce their calm state. And then once they're back down in recovery, that's time that you would want to rebrief. Doesn't have to be in the same time. I think often it's best not to occur in the same time. Same thing with situations outside of the school setting. And that's when you really want to develop future plans of how to avoid going through this whole cycle again. I just want to remind people to be managing their own curve. And I want to, you'll see some extra tips when you look at the resources, but there's a great individual crisis management plan that will be in resources that I just want to share very briefly, and that will be my last thing that I will do to wrap up. So one tool that I think is really helpful is an individual crisis management plan for students who have difficulty with emotional dysregulation, which basically involves identifying potential triggers, what the behaviors may usually look like, any safety concerns, if there are any, what kind of skills can we teach the student to help them cope with dysregulation in the future. And then what are adults in the environment going to do? What to do when the child is triggered, when the child is starting to show behaviors of concern, what helps that child or student de-escalate, and then what can we learn from the event and who the emergency contacts are. And so for students that really have ongoing difficulty with dysregulation, it's really helpful to be proactive. So with that, I will turn things back over to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I've put a number of those resources in the chat that can be downloaded now, and they will be uploaded to the webpage as well.